The rain had started again when I reached the bridge. The air was heavy, and the city felt half asleep. I stopped my scooter and looked at the river below. It was brown and strong after so many days of rain. I could hear the sound of people shouting in the distance, maybe another protest, another night full of fear. I told myself not to stay too long. It was not safe there anymore. But sometimes I liked the silence that came after the noise, that small space where I could breathe. I was in Phnom Penh, working as a foreign journalist. I had been there for almost 2 years, long enough to stop pretending that I was only an observer. At first, I wanted to write about facts, not feelings. I wanted to stay outside the story. But this city never let anyone stay outside. The people, the heat, the streets full of voices and danger, all of it found a way under my skin. I started to care too much. That was my first mistake. I lived in a small apartment above a pharmacy. The walls were thin, and sometimes I could hear the owners fighting downstairs. Every night, I sat by the window and looked at the lights over the river. There were always men fishing in the dark, their small lamps moving like fireflies on the water. I liked watching them. It reminded me that life kept going even when everything around us felt broken. His name was Min. I met him the week I arrived. He worked as a translator for a local news agency and helped me with interviews. He was quiet, always calm, and he never asked questions about my life. I liked that. He seemed to understand the strange space between being close and being alone. Over time, he started to stay after work. We would drink coffee on my balcony and listen to the city sounds below us. Min lived with his mother and younger sister in a small house near the market. His father had disappeared years ago during a time nobody wanted to talk about. I did not ask questions, but sometimes he told me small things, stories that stayed in my mind. Once he said, "The past does not leave. It waits." He smiled when he said it, but I could see the truth in his eyes. When I met Daniel, I thought he was like many of the young foreigners who came through the city, too sure, too bright, too clean. He was 25, from Canada, and worked for an international aid group that believed it could build peace through community projects. He said those words with such hope that it almost sounded innocent. He had arrived only a few months earlier, but spoke as if he understood everything. He told me that people only needed the right system, and that corruption could be beaten with goodwill. I remember smiling politely and thinking that he would learn soon enough. Daniel began coming to the press briefings and wanted to meet everyone. He asked about Min often, about how he saw the country and what local people believed. I told him to ask Min himself, but Daniel preferred to speak through me. He said I had context. That word made me laugh. I was not sure I had context anymore. I had been living between 2 lives for too long, between my work and my feelings for Min, between reporting and belonging. At first, Daniel's energy was easy to like. He brought small gifts for my team, shared stories about his travels, and spoke with excitement about every new idea. He reminded me of how I had once been when I started this work, believing that truth could change the world. He often came to our office with his camera and asked if I wanted to join him on field visits. Sometimes I went, just to see how he moved through places that scared others. He walked as if danger did not exist, as if good intentions could protect him. Min did not like him. He said Daniel asked too many questions that had no answers. I told him he was young, that he wanted to help, but Min only said, "Help is never simple." I did not understand what he meant at the time. One afternoon, I went with Daniel to a small village outside the city. The road was muddy after the rain, and the car shook all the way there. When we arrived, a group of children ran to us, laughing. They had seen many foreigners before. Daniel started taking pictures. He wanted to show hope in the middle of hardship, he said. I stood back, watching him kneel to take photos of the children's faces. There was something beautiful about his belief, but also something blind. He did not see how the mothers looked at him with suspicion, how the men stood a few meters away, silent. That night, when I told Min about it, he listened carefully. He said Daniel did not understand that every story here had more than one side. "Sometimes," he said, "what looks like kindness is also control." I did not want to believe that. I wanted to think that good people could make things better. But Min's words stayed with me. Weeks passed, and I saw Daniel more often. He invited me to a dinner for journalists and aid workers. The restaurant was expensive and full of light, very different from the world outside its doors. Everyone spoke about projects and progress, about the future. I listened quietly, feeling tired. Daniel kept talking about a new plan his group wanted to test in one of the provinces. He said it could change everything. The others laughed softly, like they had heard that line many times before. Later that evening, he walked me to my scooter. The streets were almost empty, and the air smelled like rain. He asked why I never wrote about positive stories. I told him that hope was not a headline, and he looked disappointed. Then he said something that I never forgot. "You've stopped believing." I wanted to tell him that belief was a luxury here, but I said nothing. That night when I returned home, Min was waiting on the balcony. He asked where I had been, and I told him. He stayed silent for a long time. Then he said, "You should be careful with him." When I asked why, he only said, "Because people who believe too much are the most dangerous." I wanted to laugh at the warning, but I saw something serious in his eyes. I thought he was jealous, but it was more than that. Min had seen things that Daniel and I never could. He understood how ideas could destroy lives as easily as they could build them. The rain started again before I went to sleep. I listened to it against the window and thought about the word belief. It used to sound like strength to me. Now it sounded like risk. Somewhere in the city, Daniel was probably writing another plan, another proposal to fix what he could not see. And I, who once believed in truth above all else, was learning that truth itself could wound. That was the night I began to keep a distance from him, but it was already too late. The story had begun to write itself, with or without my permission. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. The protests grew louder as the months passed. Every week there was another march, another night filled with smoke and sirens. Sometimes I went to take photos, but I stopped writing full reports. I was tired of explaining the same pain to people far away who never saw the faces behind it. My editors in London kept asking for updates. They wanted strong opinions, but I no longer had any. The lines between right and wrong were gone, mixed together with fear and love and the sound of broken glass. Daniel was still full of energy. He visited hospitals and schools, spoke with volunteers, and made videos about the spirit of the people. He said that progress was coming if we all worked together. Everyone liked him. He was clean, polite, and spoke like a teacher. But I began to notice small things that made me uncomfortable. He asked about where the protests began, who led them, and which police officers were involved. It sounded like research for a story, but I knew it was not. Min said Daniel was being used by people he did not understand. "He thinks he is saving lives," Min told me one evening, "but he is helping the wrong side." I asked what he meant, but he would not say more. His voice was low and tired, and his hands were shaking slightly when he lit his cigarette. He had lost friends that week, people taken from the streets without reason. I did not ask again. A few days later, I met Daniel for coffee. He looked happy and excited, as if he had found something important. He said he was helping some local groups to build a communication network, a safer way for people to speak freely. He believed it would protect activists from the government. He wanted to tell the world about it, and he wanted me to write the story. I tried to explain that such things were dangerous, that people could be arrested or worse. He only smiled and said, "Freedom always costs something." That sentence stayed in my head. I wanted to believe he understood what he was doing, but deep down I knew he did not. He thought his good heart could protect him. He did not see that ideals could become weapons in a country where silence kept people alive. In the weeks that followed, things became darker. There were rumors of arrests, of informants, of people who disappeared after speaking to foreign organizations. Min started avoiding calls from unknown numbers. He told me to stop meeting Daniel, at least for a while. I said I could not avoid him forever. I had to work, to keep writing. Min said, "Then write something safe." I asked what that meant, but he only looked away. One night, there was a fire near the old university. Students had gathered there to protest against a new law. I went to take photos, but by the time I arrived, the air was full of smoke. Police trucks blocked the streets. I stood near a wall and tried to keep out of sight. Suddenly, I saw Daniel on the other side of the crowd. He was helping a young man who had fallen. I wanted to shout for him to leave, but the sound of sirens covered my voice. When I reached the spot where he had been, he was gone. Later that night, I found him at a small clinic. His arm was bleeding, and his clothes were dirty. He said he was fine, but his voice shook. He told me that people had been hurt worse than him. He wanted to write a report about what happened and send it to international media. I begged him not to. He looked at me with confusion, as if I had betrayed him. "You're afraid of truth," he said. I wanted to tell him that fear was what kept people alive here, but I could not. The next morning, Min came to see me. He looked older than before. He said he heard that Daniel had been at the protest and that someone had taken photos of him helping the students. Min said the police were already looking for names. I tried to calm him, but he was right to be afraid. That afternoon, a friend from another paper called me. She said the government was planning to close some foreign aid offices, including Daniel's. It was clear that they believed his group had helped the protesters. I tried to find him, but his phone was off. His apartment was empty. I waited 3 days before he came to my place, looking pale and thin. He said his organization had asked him to leave the country. He wanted to stay, but he was being watched. He looked lost, like a child who had suddenly seen how dangerous the world could be. He said, "I only wanted to help." I told him he had done enough. He should leave before things got worse. He asked if I would go with him. For a moment, I wanted to say yes. I imagined a new start somewhere quiet, where no one talked about war or politics. But I knew I could not. My life was here now, even if it was falling apart. Min found out that Daniel was planning to leave on Friday. He said it was safer that way, but I saw the anger in his face. He blamed Daniel for bringing more attention to our circle, for making it harder for locals to stay safe. He said Daniel's good intentions had caused pain to people who never asked for help. I did not defend Daniel. I was too tired to argue anymore. On Thursday night, I met Daniel at the small cafe where we first talked. The streets were quiet. He said goodbye with sadness and confusion. He still believed that what he did was right. He said he would come back one day when the country was ready for change. I did not tell him that the country would not wait for him. I only said to be careful. That was the last time I saw him alive. 2 days later, I heard that there had been an explosion near the bridge. At first, no one knew what had happened. Some said it was an accident. Others said it was planned. A police report mentioned a motorbike and a device hidden under the seat. A witness said a foreigner had been seen nearby before the blast. When I reached the site, I saw pieces of metal and burnt paper. The air smelled like fire and wet earth. I walked through the crowd until I saw a small object lying near the edge of the river. It was Daniel's watch, the same one he used to check during our interviews, always turning it nervously around his wrist. I picked it up and felt the cold metal in my hand. That night, Min came to my apartment. He did not say much. He looked tired and older than I had ever seen him. He told me the police said it was an accident, but no one believed that. There were too many stories. Some said he was carrying something he should not have had. Others said it was planted. Min said nothing else. Before he left, he said quietly, "Sometimes silence saves more lives than truth." I could not sleep. I sat by the window until morning, watching the sun rise over the river. I kept thinking about Daniel's last words, about how he wanted to help. He had come here full of light and ideas, but he never saw the shadows that followed him. I wanted to be angry at him, but I could not. His mistakes were born from hope, and maybe that made them even sadder. The next week, I wrote my report. It was short, only a few paragraphs. It said that a young aid worker had died in an accident, that investigations were ongoing. I did not write his name. I could not. His story had already become a symbol, and I wanted to keep at least one part of him real. When I finished, I sent the report and closed my laptop. Outside, the city was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything had changed. A month passed after Daniel's death, but the city did not stop. Streets reopened, people returned to work, and the newspapers moved on to new stories. The protests had grown smaller. The government said the situation was under control. Most foreigners had left by then. Only a few of us stayed, those who no longer had anywhere else to go. I was one of them. I told myself that I stayed for my work, but that was not true. I stayed because leaving would have felt like running away from him, from Min, from everything that had happened. The city still held all my questions, and I could not leave them behind. Every morning, I walked to the small market near the river. The air was thick with the smell of coffee, fish, and dust. I liked watching people talk, trade, and argue about prices. It reminded me that life was not all politics and pain. Sometimes survival was the only form of hope people had left. Min said that once, long ago, and now I understood. He still came to see me, though not as often. He was quieter now. We rarely spoke about Daniel, but his name hung between us, invisible and heavy. Sometimes I wondered what Min knew. There were things he never said, things that lived behind his silence. I thought about asking him if Daniel's death had truly been an accident, but I was afraid of the answer. One evening, we sat on the balcony, drinking tea. The sky was orange, and the city felt calm for the first time in weeks. Min looked tired, as if the world had drained him. After a long silence, he said, "You still think of him?" I nodded. He did not ask more. Instead, he said something I did not expect. "You see, he wanted to help us. He wanted to give us something better. But people like him never understand that we are the ones who must decide what better means." I thought about that for a long time. Daniel believed in good intentions more than he believed in consequences. He had been kind, honest, and full of dreams. But dreams can be dangerous when they belong to people who never live with the results. He came to build something, and in the end, he destroyed parts of it without even knowing. Still, it was not easy to hate him. He was too human for that. He wanted to believe that his small efforts could save lives. Maybe that belief gave him peace, even if it led him into danger. Sometimes I envied him for it. Weeks turned into months. The air grew hotter, and the river dropped lower each day. I wrote a few small articles about local stories, things that were safe to publish. I avoided anything political. People had started disappearing again. Some were activists. Others were simply unlucky. The fear returned, quiet but strong, like smoke under a closed door. One afternoon, I received a message from my editor. They wanted me back in London. They said I had been away too long, that I needed a rest from the field. I stared at the email for a long time. I did not want to return. London felt too clean, too far from everything that mattered. Yet I also knew that staying here was changing me into someone I did not recognize. That evening, I went to see Min. His mother opened the door and smiled softly. She looked older, too. Min was sitting on the floor, fixing a small radio. He looked up and smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hides sadness. I told him I might leave soon. He did not try to stop me. He only said, "Sometimes leaving is another kind of courage." I wanted to ask him again about Daniel, about what he knew, but the words stayed inside me. It was as if silence had become our way of keeping peace with the past. We both understood that some truths are not meant to be spoken because speaking them changes everything. A week later, I packed my things. I found Daniel's watch in the drawer where I had left it. It still smelled faintly of smoke. I cleaned it carefully and placed it in my bag. I wanted to take it with me, not as a memory of his death, but as a reminder of what belief can cost. On my last night, I went to the bridge where it had all begun. The city was quiet, and the river moved slowly under the moonlight. I stood there for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. I thought about the moment I first saw Daniel, full of life and faith. I thought about Min, who taught me that love could exist in silence. And I thought about myself, the woman who had come here to write the truth and ended up hiding it instead. As I stood there, I realized that truth was not a single line. It was a circle that returned to the same point again and again. We all carried our own version of it. Mine was simple. Daniel had believed too much, and I had stopped believing at all. Maybe that was the real difference between us. When I returned home, the apartment felt smaller. The walls seemed closer, and the sound of the street below was louder than before. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I looked at the blank document for a long time. Then I began to write, slowly and carefully, as if each word had to earn its place. I wrote about what belief can do, how it can lift people up and destroy them in the same breath, how it can blind us to the pain we cause while trying to do good. I wrote about a young man who came to a foreign land thinking he could save it, and about a woman who watched him fall apart. I did not use our names. It was not a story for the world. It was a story for me. When I finished, I printed the pages and kept them in a folder. I did not send them anywhere. Some truths do not need readers. They only need to be written, to exist quietly in a drawer. The next morning, I left for the airport. Min came to say goodbye. He brought a small package wrapped in paper. Inside was a white scarf. "It will be cold in London," he said. I smiled and thanked him. There was nothing more to say. At the airport, I looked out at the planes waiting in the distance. Everything looked still, almost peaceful. I thought about how small we are in the middle of history, how easy it is to believe that our choices are simple. Daniel had believed that. He thought kindness could win against fear. Maybe in another life it could. As the plane lifted off, I watched the river one last time. It looked silver under the sun. I closed my eyes and imagined Daniel walking beside it, still believing in the things he loved. I imagined Min somewhere in the city, fixing another radio, keeping his silence. And I imagined myself between them, forever caught between the dream of changing the world and the truth of living in it. When I arrived in London, everything felt distant. The streets were clean, and people hurried without looking up. It was another world, calm and safe. I went to my small apartment and unpacked. I placed Daniel's watch on the table. It had stopped ticking long ago, but I left it there as it was. Some things are meant to stay unfinished. Weeks later, I returned to work. My editor said I could write about anything I wanted. I said I needed time. I went home, opened my notebook, and wrote one sentence. Belief is the quietest kind of danger. Then I closed it. At night, I still dreamed of the bridge, the sound of rain, and the young man with a camera who thought the world could be saved by hope alone. Sometimes, in my dreams, I told him to leave, to stop before it was too late. But he never listened. He only smiled and walked into the noise. I woke up each time with the same feeling, that hope, even when it fails, is still beautiful. It is the last thing people lose before they give up. Perhaps that is why I stayed so long in that city and why his story will never leave me. The truth is, Daniel was not the only idealist. I was one too, once. I came to find truth and found instead the thin line between good and harm. I learned that sometimes silence saves, but it also wounds. And I learned that love can survive even after belief is gone. I still write, but my words are softer now. I no longer chase headlines or heroes. I write about small acts of kindness, about people who survive in quiet ways. Maybe that is all any of us can do. Keep telling stories, even when we know they cannot change the world. At the end of every piece, I write a small line at the bottom, almost like a secret. It says, "For the one who believed." I never explain who it is for. I think anyone who has ever loved an idealist already knows. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.